Yeah. India.
Yeah, good morning, students. My voice is audible. Can you please confirm? And can you see my screen?
Good morning, sir. Yes, sir. We
Yeah,
can see the screen.
yeah, yeah,
Audible.
yeah. Thank you. Fine. Yeah. Students, in last class, we have seen about a class call box. So inside this class call box, we have three instance variables. And after this instance variable, I have a method called setDim. Okay. So using this setDim method, what I'm trying to do, using the setDim method, I'm trying to assign values to my instance variable. Right. Now, next, I've written a class called demo, and inside the class called demo, I've written public static void main. And now inside this main method, I'm trying to create two objects. And the name of first object is mybox1, and the name of second object is mybox2. Right now, what's going to happen here? No, let me write. So this is my first object, right? This is my first object. So what's going to happen when I create an object? A memory is going to be allocated. And what this object contains, what an object contains instance variables. So what instance variables it is having? It is having three important instance variables, that is width, that is width, that is height, and one more is depth. So it has three instance variables. And my box one, mm, my box one, so my box one is referring to this object. And similarly, I've created one more object. This is my second object. Yes, this is my second object. Right, this is my second object. And the second object also will have three instance variables, that is width, that is height, 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 and then depth. And my box 2, okay, and my box 2 is a reference variable which is referring to this object, right? Now what I want now, for this width, height, and depth, I need to set the values, okay. In other words, for this instance variables with respect to my box 1, I need to set the values. In order to set the values, what I've done, I've called a setDim method. I've called a setDim method. So once I call a setDim method, what is going to happen? The value 10 will be passed to W. So therefore, the value of W will be 10. Okay. Next, value 20 will be passed to H, and the value of H will be 20. And the value 5 will be passed to D. The value of D will be 5. Is it right? Now, here you see the students, I've called setDim method with respect to my box 1. I've called this setDim method. I call this setDim method with respect to my box 1. And since I've called setDim method with respect to my box 1, the width, height, and depth. The width, height, and depth belongs to my box 1. Okay. So here my box 1 is referring to this object, and therefore the width of this is 10. Okay. The height of this is 20, and the depth of this is it is 5. Is it right? Fine. Right, students? Yeah. Let me clear this. Yeah. 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 And next you see that I'm sorry, a small typo mistake. This is my box 2. Next you see the students, I'm calling setDim method. With respect to my box 2, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to pass 20. I'm passing 20 to W. I'm passing 30 to H, and I'm passing 10 to D. And what's the value of W? The value of W is nothing but here it is 20. Okay, 20 I'm passing to W, 20. And what's the value of H? That is 30. 30 I'm passing here. It will be 30. And what's the value of D? It's nothing but it is 10. Here 10 I'm passing. It's nothing but it is 10. Okay. As you see that I'm calling this setDim method with respect to my box 2. Since I'm calling setDim method with respect to my box 2, the width, height, and depth which I've written, it belongs to my box 2. All right. And therefore, you see that my box 2 is referring to this object, and therefore the width value of this will be 20, and the height value of this will be 30, right? And the depth value of this is 10. Okay. So these so we can set a values to the instance variables. Right? We can set a values to your instance variable, right? And let me clear my drawings. So this how we have set values to the instance variables, right? Yeah. Now the question is there any better approach compared to this? In other words, in order to set values to these instance variables, okay, in order to set values, you see that in order to set values to these instance variables, what I've done, I've used a method called setDim. Okay. I've used a method called setDim, and using this method called setDim, what I've done, I've set the values. How I've set the values? With respect to object. So like this, I've set the values. Now, instead of using methods, is there any better approach in not to set values to these instance variables? That's what we are going to see. Is there any better approach apart from methods in not to set values to these instance variables? The answer is yes. Instead of going for methods, we can go for constructors. Go for constructors. The constructors is always the best approach. The constructors is constructors is always the best approach whenever you want to set values to your instance variables. So whenever you want to set values to your instance variable, you should always use constructors, but you should not use methods. Constructors is a better approach. So using method also, you see that we can set the values. I have set the values. I have set the values using method also. But using methods is not a better approach in not to set values to your instance variables. And what is a better approach? The better approach is constructors. The constructors is better approach in not to set values to your instance variables. But you should never use methods. Okay. If you use method also, you can set the values, but it's not a good approach. And that's what I would like to say. And okay, fine, students. So now let us see. Now let us see how to write a constructors in Java. Okay, now let us see how to write a constructors in Java. And before that, let me try to erase these values. So it is, okay, let me try to erase. Let me try to erase those things. Yeah, let me try to erase this. Let me, once again, let me use this. Okay, fine. So now we are going to see, now, 1 second. Now we are going to see constructors. We are going to see constructors. We are going to see constructors. See, why we are seeing constructors? Because using constructors, what we can do? We can set values to this instance variables. Now question is, what is a constructor? Can anyone? Because with respect to C++, we have seen these constructors. Can you define the constructor? Anyone? What's a constructor? Yes, students, can any one of you define? Or you can type in the chat box also. What's a constructor? Anyone? What's a constructor? Yes, you're expecting me to call your names? No, you should tell. Okay, fine. Let me call Sukrut, Vaishnavi, Kavana, Sai Shri, Maithili, Manjusha.
So constructor is used to initialize objects.
That's okay, fine. You use constructors in order to initialize the objects. Very good. Any other definition? Any other definition? Okay, let me write this. A constructor. Someone is typing. That's good. Someone has typed in chat box. Padmaja says that a constructor is a specialized member function. Good, Padmaja. That's good. That's fine. Any other answers, students? Okay, let me write. A constructor is very, very important. This is how you need to. This is how you need to define a constructor. A constructor will have the same name as a class name. A constructor will have a same name as a class name, but it means but it means but constructor does not have return type. It's very, very, very important. Okay, a constructor will have the same name as a class name, but the most important thing is a constructor does not have a return type. That's the first thing. That's the first point you need to remember with respect to constructor. And what's the second point with respect to constructor? These are two important points which you need to remember. And the second point is, okay, a constructor will be a constructor will be called automatically whenever an object of a class is created. Students, this is very, very important definition. This is very, very important. These 2 points are very, very important with respect to constructors, right? Now, Let us focus on these definitions. Yes, I think I've discussed this. So what is a constructor? A constructor will have the same name as very, very important, as I've discussed with respect to C++. A constructor will have the same name as a class name. And what's the name of the class? That is box. The name of the class is box. So what is telling? A constructor will have the same name as what? Same name as class name. So with respect to this definition, so let me write a constructor. Okay. So let me write a constructor. So constructor will have the same name as a class name. Okay, that's what it says. Okay, class name. Class name. That's what it says. Okay. But you see that it does not have a return type. See that? And I have not written any return type here. But whereas with respect to methods, you see that method is having a name, but this method is having a return type. You see that the method is having return type. But whereas a constructor does not have any return type. And that's what the definition says. A constructor will have same name as a class name, but it does not have a return type. Right? So inside this constructor, what we can do, inside this constructor, you can set the values for your instance variables. What I can do it in this constructor, I can set the values. So for width, I can set 10. For height, I can set 20. And for depth, I can set 5. Is it right, students? Now, I don't want this one. Right now, I don't want this method. Now, since I'm trying to set the values uh, with respect to this constructor. Okay. And then, yeah. Is it fine, students? Is it fine? So this so you need to write your constructor. You see that the constructor is having the same name as a class name. We call this entire block of code. This entire block of code, we call it as constructor. Fine. This entire block of code, we call it as constructor. This entire block of code, we call this as a constructor. Is it right, students? Yeah, fine. Next point. Anyhow, let me clear all this stuff. Okay. That's the point one. Okay. And let me scroll down a little bit. Yeah. Now the question is when this constructor will be called. When this constructor will be called. And just now I said a constructor will be called automatically whenever we try to create an object of a class. Whenever we try to create an object of a class, a constructor is called automatically. You see the students here, I have created one object. I have created one object. So since I'm creating an object of a class, immediately the control jumps to the constructor and the code inside the constructor will get executed. And what's the code inside the constructor? I have said width equal 10, height equal 20, and depth equal 20. Okay. Now this width, height, and depth. All these three variables belongs to my box. Belongs to my box, and therefore you see that my box is pointing to this, and the value of width, is nothing but it is 10, and height is 20, and depth is 5. Is that right? Yeah. And you see that, and next time, in the second case, you see that I'm creating one more object. I've created a second object. I've created a second object. So whenever we create an object of a class, control immediately jumps inside the constructor. In second case, this width, height, and depth. In second case, the width, height, and depth belongs to my box too. So therefore, inside this my box 2, the value of width will be 10, and the value of height will be 20, and the value of depth will be 5. Value of depth will be 5. Is it right? So like this, using constructors, you see that using constructors, we can set values to the instance variables. Okay. So using these constructors, we can set values to your instance variables. Like this, we can set. Now, Now, and one more thing. And what is the problem with respect to this block of code? See here, how many objects have created, students? Here I've created 2 objects. Yes, I have created 2 objects. So this is my first object and this is my second object. Okay, but these 2 objects, you see that the values for my instance variables are same. The values for my instance variables are same, right? Let us assume that I'm creating some 10 objects. 1, 2, 3, it goes on, it goes on. Let us assume I've created 10 objects. If I create 10 objects, for all these 10 objects, the values of the instance variables always remains the same. In other words, the dimensions of all the box. Okay. What is width, height, and depth? What is this width, height, and depth? Width, height, and depth it tells the dimensions of the box. It tells the dimensions of your box. It tells the dimension of your box. And what is the width? What is the width? And what's the height? And what's the height? And what is the depth? That's what it says. It says the dimensions of the box. So with respect to these constructors, okay, the dimensions of all the boxes are same. Okay, all okay. The dimensions of all the boxes same with respect to this constructor. But now I want to write. Now I want to write a constructor. No, I want to write a constructor. Okay, which takes different values for each and every object. Right now, for example, I've created a first object. That is the object is my box one. So my box one will take different values, and my box two will take different values. Right? How this can be done? Okay. Um, 1 second, students. Um, 1 second. What I mean to say that here, each object, so each object instance variables, each object instance variable, okay, we need to assign different values. So you see that here my box one is taking 10, 25. Here my box two also is taking 10, 25. Both objects are taking the same values with respect to instance variables. Now what I want to set different values to this instance variable. That is, for my box one, I want to set different values, and for my box two, I want to set different values. How I can achieve this? So in order to achieve this, what we need to do, we need to go for parameterized constructor. We need to go for parameterized constructor. I think this parameterized constructor we have seen with respect to C++, and the concept remains the same, right? The concept remains the same. And let me erase this and let me write a parameterized constructor. Okay. Why I am picking a parameterized constructors? Because for each object instance variable, that is for each object instance variables, I want to set different values, right? For each object instance variables, what I want, students, I want to set different values. So in order to do that, I'm going for parameterized constructor. What is parameterized constructor? You see that inside this parenthesis, I'm going to pass some parameters. So what parameters I'll be passing? I'll be passing um, double width, double height, double, and W stands for width. Okay, so that's why here and W. Okay, H stands for height. Okay, so instead of 20, we're writing H. Okay, D stands for depth. So instead of 5, I'll write D. Now, now you see the students. Now, at the time of creating an object, what is it? When we create an object, the control jumps to the constructor. When we create an object of a class, the control jumps to the constructor. But you see that my constructor is taking 3 arguments. This is my first argument, this is my second argument, and this is my third argument. My constructor is taking 3 arguments. Therefore, at the time of creating object, what I need to do, I need to pass values. That is 10. 10 goes for W, and 20 goes for height, and 30 and 5. And 5 will go for this depth. Similarly, when I'm trying to create second object, 20 will go to height, 20 will go to width, and 30 will go to height, and 10 will go to depth, right? You see that? Okay. Why I'm passing, students? You see that here. Why I'm passing here 3 values 10, 20, 30? Because my constructor is expecting 3 arguments. That is my first argument. This is my second argument. This is my third argument. Okay. So that's why this 10 will go to W, and this 20 will go to H. This 20 will go to H, and this 5 will go to D. Right. Okay. And therefore, and what's the value? Now, what's the value of W? It is 10. And what's the value of H? It is 20. And what's the value of D? It is 5. Okay. Now, as you know that this width, height, and depth, it belongs to my box 1. It belongs to my box 1. You see that here. Now, inside is my box 1. And what's the value? The same values, right? So it is 10 will be set, 20 will be set, and 5 will be set. This is same. Okay. And next let us see. This is my first object. And this is my second object. In my second object, what I'm passing? 20, 30, 10. And this 20 will go to W. The value of W will be 20. The value of W will be 20. And next I'm passing 30, and 30 will go to H. 30 will go to H, and the value of H will be 30. And next this 10 I'm passing to W, and the value of D, the value of D will be 10. Okay. So now this width, I'm sorry. Now this width, height, and depth. Now this width, height, and depth belongs to my box 2. It belongs to my box 2, and therefore, so my box 2 is pointing to this object. And what's the value of width? It is 20. It is 20, and it is 30. It is 30, and next it is 10. It is 10. Now you see that I have set different dimensions for a box. I have set different dimension. That is, for box 1, the values of instance variable is 10, 20, and 5. And for my box 2, the values of instance variable is 20, 30, and 10. So whenever you want to pick a different values to your instance variables, in such a case, you need to go for this parameterized constructor. Okay. Whenever you want to set different values to your instance variable which is present inside your object, in such a case you need to pick this parameterized constructor, and we call this as parameterized constructor. Why parameterized? Because you see that my constructor is taking parameters or arguments. Since my constructor is taking parameters, we call this as parameterized constructor. Let me remove all my drawings, and so that it looks to be quite clear to you. This entire box. Yes, we call this as parameterized constructor. We call this as parameterized constructor. Why? Because you see that my constructor is taking parameters. Right? Yeah, fine. I hope you understood this. Right? Any questions, students, up to this point? You can ask. There are no questions. That's well and good. I'll be writing. Any questions, students? Okay, fine. There are no questions. That's well and good. Let me write a small program. Let me clear all my drawings. Let me write a small program. Now, I'm finished. You see the students inside my class call box. How many constructors I have written? This is my first constructor. This is my first constructor, and next I've taken one more constructor. So this is my second constructor. This is my second constructor. And next, I have written one more constructor. And the code goes down. Just now we have seen a constructor, right? This is my third constructor. This is my code. This is my third constructor, right? See, in your class call box, okay, we can write n number of constructors. In a class call box, we can write n number of constructors. There is no constraint that we should write only one constructor, or we should write only zero argument constructors, or we should write only parameterized constructor. Nothing like that. We can write n number of constructors, and a constructors can be a zero argument constructor, or it can be a parameterized constructor. We can write any constructor, and not only that, we can write n number of constructors. You see that here the name of the constructor is same. You see that here the name of constructor is box, here also it is box, and here also it is box. And what is varying? Only the arguments is varying. Here it is zero arguments, here it is one argument. In first case it is zero arguments, in next case it is one argument, and here with respect to this, that is with respect to third constructor, I'm having how many arguments? 3 arguments. Okay, but the name of the constructor remains same, and we call this as constructor overloading. We call this as constructor. We call this as constructor overloading. I think same thing I've discussed with respect to C++. The same concept, constructor overloading. Why constructor overloading? The name of the constructor remains same, and what is varying? Only the parameters is varying. In first case it is 0, in second case it is 1, and third case it is 3 arguments. So that's why we call this as a constructor overloading. In other words, this class is an example. This class box is an example of constructor overloading. 2 or more constructors, okay, 2 or more constructor with different arguments. 2 or more constructor with different arguments, and that's why we call this as a constructor overloading. This is the first observation, we need to do it. Okay, and next thing yes. Yes. And someone is typing. Yeah, let me check. Someone is typing in chat box. Sir, if a class has a constructor, will it be the main class? Actually, it depends upon how you are going to write the code, Rahul. Rahul is asking a question. If a class has a constructor, will it be the main class? Yes, it can become, but generally they'll never write like this. Okay, but no, I'll come to that point later, Rahul. Right? Let me finish my discussion. So right now, here my class box is having these 3 instance variables. It has 3 constructors, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, it has 3 constructors. Now let me try to create an object of a class. Let me try to create an object of a class. And what is the objects? Let me try to create an object of a class called box. So how to create an object of a class? You should begin with the keyword called new, followed by the name of the class, that is box. I have created the first object. Next, let me create one more object. New box. New box. So inside this, I am passing a value called 20. Next, new box. I'm passing 10, 20, 30. So how many objects I have created? 1, 2, 3. But I have not given name to this box. In case you want to give name, you can give it. Okay, that's not my focus. Okay. Now, you see the students here. In first case, this is case 1. In case 1, I have created an object. But you see that at the time of creating object, I have not passed any arguments. Since you're not passing any arguments, inside the class call box, so I'm creating an object of a class call box, right? So at the time of creating, I have not passed any arguments. Since I have not passed any arguments, so inside the class call box, I need to find a constructor which is taking zero arguments, Is there any constructor which is taking zero arguments? Yes, the constructor one is a constructor one is taking zero argument. So when we create an object something like this, so okay, this is going to invoke this constructor. Why is going to invoke this constructor? Because here I have not passed any arguments. Okay. In second case, you see that okay, I passed a single argument. That is 20, right? Now, inside the class call box, I need to find a constructor which is taking a single argument, and this type of single argument is double, right? Can I find a constructor which is taking single argument? Yes, you see that I can find a constructor which is taking single argument, and the type is nothing but is double, and therefore, this statement is going to invoke this constructor. Okay. And similarly, you see that here, students, okay. And next I return new box. So at the time of creating an object, how many values I'm passing? 1, 2, 3. Now inside the class call box, I need to find a constructor which is taking 3 arguments. Whether I'm having a constructor, yes, you see that the constructor 3 is taking 3 arguments. This is my first argument, second argument, and third argument. So this object is going to invoke this constructor. That's very, very important. You should know how the constructors are called. Constructors are called with respect to arguments. It's very, very important. The constructors are called with respect to arguments. Here you see that I pass 0 arguments. Since these 0 arguments, I'm going to call 0 argument constructor. You see that here I'm passing a single argument. So I'm going to call a constructor which is taking single argument. That's what I'm calling. And here you see that at the time of creating object, I passed 3 arguments. Since I passed 3 arguments, I'm going to call a constructor which is taking 3 arguments. So that's why I'm calling a constructor called 3. So based on the arguments which are passing at the time of creating object, the corresponding constructor will be invoked. The constructor will be invoked. Okay, that's very, very important. Now, let me clear all my drawings. So not write the code. What you should do, the same code you can do, and is not required. Okay. And the first time, I'm not calling 0. Okay. Actually, I'll be. Now you see that anyhow. Next it is 20. And that's what I've done. Okay. That's what I've done. Okay. That's what I've done. And students, mute your mic. I don't know who is that. Yeah. And that's what I've done. You see that I've created first object, second object, third object. Okay. So when you write new box, only object is created. Okay. Okay. In order to give name to this object, and this object, what you can do, you can assign to a variable. So since you're trying to assign it to a variable, now for this object, you're giving the name as my box. With respect to my box 1, I can call this object. And you see that for second object, I given a name called my box 2. So therefore, with respect to my box 2, I can call this object. Okay. And for third object, I given a name called my box 3. And with respect to my box 3, I can call this. The most important, I think that's fine. And that's what I would have. The main important thing is you should know how the constructors are called. Okay. And that's what I've discussed. Let me clear my drawings. And last and one thing I would like to discuss here. Let us assume I removed everything. I removed everything. I removed everything, and